Am I on? Yes. Hi. Hello. Uh, my name is Mark Jenkins. I'm an emeritus professor from the School of Drama, and I've been invited here for a few moments. I just want to say in passing, Jeremy, that was a lovely, inspiring speech. Gives me great hope for the future of hearing from you. So, yeah, I'm here to introduce an American poet, Ada Limón, who's a current Guggenheim Fellow, is the author of 5 poetry collections, including The Carrying, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Poetry. Her 4th book, Bright Dead Things, was named a finalist for the National Book Award, and a finalist for the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, and a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. She has been featured on the cover of American Poetry Review, and she serves on the faculty of Queen's University of Charlotte, the low residency MFA program, and lives in Lexington, Kentucky. Well, while she was at UW as an undergrad, she was in a class of mine, and I found her to be a delightful and probing student actor. But alas, we lost her to poetry. But I think that's poetry's gain, and perhaps all of our gain, because poets are very special people, very special powers, and anyway, I believe poets are just terrific. And I believe that another drama emeritus professor, Barry Witham, was a significant mentor to Ada in her early days of writing. A couple of years ago, I was lucky to have reconnected with Ada at the Skagit Valley Poetry Festival, and I was able to hang out with her and to witness and to see and hear how a precocious UW undergrad had become a full-blown, important American poet, and also one who's just great fun to be around. So it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to the class of 2021, Ada Limón.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's so wonderful to see you. Oh, it is such a joy to be here with all of you. Jeremy, that was a fantastic speech. I immediately want to go back to school. Thank you for having me. Thank you to Holly and Deb for inviting me to speak. It's such an honor to be a part of this momentous occasion. Over 20-something years ago, I still remember the day when I first walked into the drama department. I was wandering around the campus feeling lost and overwhelmed by a sense of isolation. I was missing my family, 18 and full of heartache and confusion. I opened the doors to Hutchinson Hall, and suddenly there was a cacophony of sounds. People laughing in the hallways, people in bare feet running from room to room. Someone was singing full-throated in the lounge. There was a sense of aliveness in the air, bodies aware of being bodies, minds alive with ideas and impulses. And for the first time since I had arrived in Seattle, I felt something like relief. Here were my people, those loud and laughing creative souls that roamed and vibrated the hallways were exactly what I had been looking for. Those humans who were interested in making art, interested in exploring the deeply human stories that bind us all together. What I didn't realize then was what I was learning in that department of free spirits, risk takers, and brilliant mentors would sustain me throughout my life outside the fold, the life of an artist, the life of a poet. Those years taught me it is the sense of presence that one must cultivate on stage and off that is essential. That sense of presence that we need to grow and protect within ourselves is what keeps us in a state of wonder. And that sense of wonder continues to serve me not just as an artist, but as a human moving in the often unfriendly chaos of the world. I like this life outside the fold. But there are also a few things I have learned along the way that I wanted to share with you in hopes they prove useful. Perhaps none of these points are particularly profound or earth-shattering, but they took me a long time to discover for myself. And knowing them now fuels my sense of balance and dedication when it comes to making art. As you know, this year has been a year of killing old myths, reckoning with the deeper truths of our society, learning a new sense of ongoingness. So why not obliterate things we don't find useful anymore when it comes to the creative life? The first myth I want to banish from our minds is that art is suffering. That simply isn't true. There's not a day that goes by when I don't think how strange and wonderful it is to make something, to create some piece of art and send it into the world, or to not send it into the world, but to have made it, to have paid attention to something long enough that you have made a whole new thing out of that attention, whether it's a poem, a play, a dance, a memoir, a performance, a song. The act of making something feels like the act of loving. It is messy and difficult and full of sharp edges, and yet when it is done with patience, it can offer that same satisfaction that love might offer, a new reality in which honoring can have value. Truth be told, I've never understood people who think creative work is suffering. While I understand to revisit past trauma or write or act through traumatic events, either real or fictionalized, can cause great pain, the act of making art is also the act of transformation, so that even if we start in suffering, we don't end in suffering. When folks talk about agonizing over the page or the torture of finishing a production, the long rehearsal, a draft of something, I am left somewhat befuddled. Sure, making something is hard at times, unforgiving and ethereal, time-consuming, energy-draining, tenderizing. But what if we began the entire process with praise, gratitude even? What if we said, I get to make something. Today, I will use this precious stolen hour or hours and make something. What seems much harder to me is to not make something, to not be given the time or space or the little bit of encouragement that might allow us to move forward with creating. I think often of how my grandfather on my father's side was such a creative soul. He could sing and dance and act. And yet, because he had crossed that infamous border to the South, he went from living in a chicken coop and graduating college. Art was a luxury. Art goes in the when everything is said and done, maybe I will have time for this unnecessary fiddling pile. We feel we must put everything before making art. And in some cases, that's true. We must take care of our basic needs, the rent, the bills, the job that pays the bills, the laundry, the children, the dog that needs the walk, the parent that needs an errand run. But we often do the business of life before we do the business of love. And so when we finally come to it, finally sit down to find ourselves in front of the notebook, the empty stage, shouldn't we feel like that is the opposite of suffering? And instead, the place we finally come to feel free? What a gift it is to make something, to have had someone in your life who said, you're pretty good at that. You should do more of it. Or to have known it for ourselves, to have known that this thing we hold dear was worthy of our time or even our devotion. Or when someone told us that our little obsession with words or music or theater was useless or pointless or worse, even selfish. How brave it was that something inside of us stood up in ourselves and said, that only makes me want to do it more. And so while this may be a dissenting opinion, I do not think it is hard to make art. It is hard to be hungry and heartbroken. It is hard to be at war with a world that doesn't acknowledge your humanity. It is hard to speak up against injustice. It is hard to watch someone you love get ill. It is hard to get ill. It is even hard to wait tables, especially during the brunch shift in high heels, with everyone holding up their empty coffee cup while you try to remember who had decaf and who had the side of bacon. It is not hard to create something. That gets to be our gift. That is what we should be grateful for. I'm not saying it's not risky or exhausting or terrifying at times, but the fact that we get to make art, get to choose a creative life, that is something worthy only of praise. The second myth that I think is no longer useful is that in order to be an artist, you must be a tortured soul. For years, I have said that writing poetry is my answer to, where do I put all of this? It's not about dramatizing or parading trauma. It's about laying it down so I can live. Sometimes after a particularly hard poem or an essay, I've put my hand on the page or on the screen and said, here, you stay here. And the remarkable thing is, it does. It does stay on the page. Even if it's resurrected at a reading or a conversation, I can talk about it for what it is, a poem, an essay, something crafted, something made, not something purely factual, but something transformed. I firmly believe our art doesn't want us to feel tortured. Our art doesn't want us to be so hungover we can't make something, so worried about rent that we can't have time to make art, or so traumatized by pain that we can't create. Our art wants us to be healthy. Any myth that presumes that artists must suffer in order to make great art is wholly wrong, because in the middle of great pain and fear, words, writing, creating, the creative spirit doesn't exist. When I was younger, I thought both art and love were made realer by pain. It seemed to me that those extreme emotions were how you knew it was authentic, burning, passionate, worthy of reverence. But as I've aged, I've learned that it's the steady love, the steady practice of making art, the practice that is balanced, sturdy, reliable, that is the truest friend. And if you have delivered a gorgeous performance when you were in turmoil, that's wonderful. And if you have written a play that you have been the most praised for when you were feeling tortured by the world, good for you. But don't let that experience trick you into believing that turmoil and torture is the place where your art wants you to exist. Like love, art is about the long game, what can sustain you through the years, not about the quick fix or the brief triumph of applause. To make a thing is the goal, but also to live in attention, presence, and maybe now and again something like ease is also the goal. To live wholly is to create wholly. And in that way, we will not be the tortured artist, but the deeply attentive artist, the wholly present human. There has to be something said for witnessing the world closely and with attention that brings us closer to the full experience of being alive. And the last myth I want to dispel is the myth of scarcity. Something we are taught to believe in our artistic communities, graduate schools, and certainly on social media is that if someone receives something, a good role, a grant, a publication, a great review, it means one thing and one thing only, that we didn't get it. And most likely that we will never get it. And it means that their art is more valued than our art. We can barely celebrate for someone in the room because our first thought is, I didn't win that. And now I can't win that. And now it is no longer available to me. I want to tell you that I don't believe in this way of thinking anymore. I don't think it's real. I'm not sure if it was ever real. I think it's a byproduct of toxic thinking that breeds unhealthy competition and keeps artists from thriving. I think of the quote by the native writer Robin Wall Kimmerer, all flourishing is mutual. And I say it all the time. When a plant flourishes, so do the animals around it. When trees flourish, so do human beings. And when another artist flourish, so do we. Why? Because they are making more art, and that art is being lauded and celebrated, and someone is reading it, and someone is putting it out in the world. And doesn't that mean that the world of art is going on and on and on so beautifully well? To release that sense of competition is also to return to the original idea of why we do this in the first place. We make art not to be loved for our art, not to be famous, but we make art because it helps us survive. It gives us a framework for our lives, the way we want to live. It allows us to challenge our own notions of truth. It allows us to find a freedom that we can rarely find anywhere else in our lives. Because we make art because we love it, because we can't not make art, doesn't mean I am saying we can't fiercely be dedicated to our own success. It also doesn't mean that we can't demand payment for our worth or fight for our own value. It only means that sometimes we must adjust what success means. And we must let that definition constantly change for us. Sometimes success means finishing a draft of a new play. Sometimes success means handing it to an agent. Sometimes just handing it to a friend. Sometimes a good role. Sometimes it means just knowing you need a nap. But we can hold on to the idea at its core that success means having made something, having spent the time to make something, we will be able to fill our cup. And in filling our cup, we will also be more easily prone to practice the art of sympathetic joy with one another. And if I am truthful, the world is not easy for artists. Even at our best and most successful, the majority of society will think we are strange and absurd to want to make something when we should only be concerned with the accrual of wealth and filling into society norms. The world wants us inside the fold, but this is where we must close ranks. This is where we must rely on each other. We must protect one another because you will need to lean on each other for the rest of your creative lives, not just as creative partners in collaborations, but as friends who can remind you who you are. I met my best friend in the drama department on the steps of Hutchinson Hall. And in turn, we built a community of creative people around us who told us never to give up, even when it seemed much easier to just give up. One of those friends is the actor Corey Stoll. I asked him if he had anything to add in advice to graduates, and he said, people will ask you all the time, so you want to be an actor? And it will make you feel very small because it implies you only become an actor when someone pays you to act. You can politely say yes, but no, inside, you already are, because all it takes to be an actor is to be an actor. I love this because he's saying you already have what you need, and you do. You have yourself and you have each other. You must remember to celebrate each other at all times. There will be failure and rejection. Sure, envy will creep up, despair too. So celebration is key. The small successes, the large ones, the daily gift of survival, just getting by. Surround yourself with people who will celebrate you, and in turn, be the first person to show up in the front row and clap loudly and hard. In closing, try to remember that the creative life is not about suffering or the cutthroat competition, but rather about finding gratitude, practicing deep attention, and cultivating community. I didn't know that stumbling into the drama department all those years ago would change my life, but it did. And you may not know it now, but your life is changing as we speak. You are choosing a life just a little outside the fold. And I, for one, think you're going to love it here. Congratulations.